All right. I had to start thinking about this. I was like, yeah, what it is, I want to be out in the cold air walking because then it makes it easier for me to crunch some ideas. Okay, so I had mentioned before how everything is based around sexual market value. So one of the things that we're kind of seeing is that relationship issues of the present generation, what it is, first, it's modern versus traditional. It's not like modern versus some kind of classic woman or some old-timey woman or something like that. It's the idea of modern versus traditional. And this is actually like quite literally where we get these terms. The modern period, like modernist art, and the very way that people, like, say a group like the Eurythmics, a group like Selector. These are groups that were built around modernism. David Bowie is a modernist art act. There we go. Where traditional you would get with and everything, modernism bled into everything. So it's there's very little you can like point to outside of that which is like absolutely traditional, and that like it is this traditional song from this traditional in this traditional manner, yada yada yada. The modern period is simply especially attached to that art can become inexpensive and that people could buy it. That you could have consumer, like really high level of design priced down to the consumer level. So IKEA was one of the ultimate things of modern. That's why even Kevin Samuels sang, I think he called it an IKEA marriage or something. He had some term like that. I forget what it was. But that's a very good example of that, where it's like I'm wondering if, knowing him, he knew exactly what he was talking about. But it's just that that's funny on a number of levels because of that, for that reason, that's what modern is referring to. This also then refers to the idea of the introduction of chemical birth control to the mass population. There was no longer something that was like, say, a type of treatment that was an off-label use of hormones for, say, the upper class, and it became an actual product. And because that's really what we're talking about when we talk about a lot of kind of the secret world of before they allowed the pill, was that the idea is that there would be probably uses of hormones, so that women basically were fundamentally on a kind of birth control. And I figure I would have to do more research, but it seems to go to figure. Anyway, so that changes how that women basically get lots of partners, but they're without the same risk of pregnancy. And that changes the fundamental structure of sort of this Christian marriage type, where these two people are very inexperienced and they grow in experience together and usually have their children together with that as that experience goes on. So that is actually accurate to human history. Abortives, the idea that young women were sort of encouraged to experiment sexually, but avoid pregnancy in times before, like way back in the days of matriarchy. That's true. One of the key things that we don't really like talking about is what a lot of the pagan temples that would have been, we would have known about. These would have been just basically kind of like really awesome whores in a lot of cases, and you paid in silver for their company. And if the woman was impregnated, that there would be a certain amount of money doled out to her as and that she goes back to her family with this foreigner's kid. And this would probably be, this is a very lucrative business for the town. And it's how the motherhood will always pimp out the girls. There's really something that a lot of women now aren't getting. A lot of young women, they're starting to. Pearl's show has kind of brought it up a little. Kevin Samuels definitely showed you all how older women really will give you horrible advice. They'll come up with a legal structure that will make your life fucking horrible. Without boomer liberal women, you can't have all this fucking chaos in the cities right now that makes being a young woman fucking miserable right now. Like, there's all this stuff that you sort of can do, but it's not really exactly safe. It's not like back in the day when it was safe. And, well, it's these old fucking witches. They're just ruining your fucking lives. And so Brie Folk gets into this in The Mothers, that this isn't strange behavior. This is actually kind of the way that as you see society spiral down the toilet, you see the different parts of the society behave. And one of the keys to this now are the new witches, these new women who are going to take over, who they're not just low sexual market value. What these are is the Tran boys, the eunuchs, and the warlocks and the mutants. You see this with why there's so many of these people in Antifa. We spotted this. The right wing was completely correct about everything. The far right and the people who knew this was going to get worse, and these people were going to get more and more insane. They're going to get more and more like some Dark Knight Returns kind of villains. With eventually they're going to have like pasties that are like swastikas and stuff. Fighting with the Ukrainian colors on. Like they'll march around in Ukrainian uniforms. I just love that the left is supporting an openly neo-Nazi regime, and they refuse to admit the overwhelming evidence of such. It's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful, the level of retardation that the left is showing in mutation. But one of the key things about this is it's the low sexual market value. A lot of guys on the left are fives at best. They're fives on their best day of their lives. They have like a period of time, maybe they get their shit together, but they're just normal men. They're very normal looking, or less than normal looking. In one's youth, especially now that things like open athletic competition is exceedingly optional now, and I gotta admit, I wasn't all that into a whole lot of. There's a wide variety of sports that I was like, I would rather we not play this every day, but we do. And that is kind of the way things work, but it's also the failure of us being creative about education, which again goes back to the fact that mothers don't really care. That over about the last 2 to 3 generations, mothers have cared less and less and less. There's been a fascination since really about World War I with child psychology, and child psychology has been pretty shitty in its results. Counselors shitty in their results, a lot of psych, a lot of head shrinkers of all sorts, really shitty in their results. They don't really have a whole lot to show for how their methods actually work 2 times the same way. So, it's like they can't really replicate their findings. This is big with like GenderSexuality and stuff like that. You can't replicate the findings. Because you have these parts of the society that very early on they realize, like, I am going to have a hard time being fundamentally popular. Popular usually is attractiveness during your most neotenous period, when you're coming into the second portion of sexual maturity. So this is women between 16 and 20, the Perfect 10 magazine models, the Instas, and all that kind of business. You see these guys like, they're neotenists during the early period of their music career, even to the point of androgyny and stuff like that, which is, particularly modern. That's a modern man thing. So when women want to be like, well, what about modern men? What you're dealing with are modern men. When you say that, what you're referring to are men who are in some way androgynous or effeminate, especially if they wear a lot of fashion. That's modern. That's a modern man. Traditional men wear clothes, they have very strict kind of different clothing for different purposes, and not a lot of it. And trying to look like a dandy, as the term would have come up. You could even find, there's a reggae artist, Dandy. Skinheads were called Doc Martin dandies. The skinheads are one of the first, most identifiable modernist cults. Cults, so it would be a subculture of youth. Being a group that was opposed to the hippies in Britain. So they had an almost nadir look, that they had this look that was fundamentally British, fundamentally American, and kind of militant looking, but was meant to actually, like, if you knew what you were seeing, you would see that they're wearing actually relatively expensive clothing, and that they were also like very, very into shining the boots, so that they looked very, very nice, no matter if they used them or not, and no matter if they used them, how much they used them. And so knowing about that kind of thing, like, so this is something you would associate with, say, black men now wearing athletic gear that they're not doing athleticism in, and making sure their tennis shoes are constantly clean because they're not actually playing, any kind of sports in them. That's modern. Like it or not, like, now you understand, like, now you get it. And you could then stack up other behaviors based on that. So if you're like, oh, modern men are this way, is this the kind of guy who has perfect sneakers and lots of them? That's modern. So, as opposed to even a example, Tramp, Otis and Carla. What does he have? He has broke iron shoes. So what they're talking about is he has some kind of work boots. And because he's a traditional man. He's a traditional man from the Georgia woods. The Georgia woods are good, as he says in the song. And he has these coveralls and boots. He doesn't have fancy shoes. And like, literally, music of the time, there's songs about having fancy shoes. Like, I have songs of those times about fancy shoes. And so that's modern. Not traditional men had very little, and it's because that's the only way everybody else ended up looking good in the family. And typically you'd be like, well, what about clothing, this, that, and the other? Well, it would be that your wife would find stuff. Your wife would find good deals on something, and she typically dressed you. This was true into my own lifetime, that Dad simply had no time to go shopping for stuff, so Mom would buy stuff for him. It just works that way. And then also, he's not wearing something she doesn't like. That's another, and that's just the way men and women are once you're married. So a lot of people who come out of these blue enclaves, who come out of these, I'm all sorts of GenderSexual, or they come out of wherever they come out of like that, they very likely knowing stuff like that, that aspect of family life, even getting that part of Americana, that doesn't exist. They don't have almost any connection to anything probably before their lifetime, or it's a kind of a curiosity. It's like this odd thing that they're really into, like swing music or something like that, but they're not really so they're deracinated. With no history of their culture, you're deracinated. This is one of the things that really affects black people so much, is being deracinated, and especially not knowing anything about black Americans prior to their own lifetime, and going out of their way to not. Like, this is the saddest thing for a lot of us, like, especially in the black manosphere, because a lot of us, like, we really went out of our way to, like, learn things. And then you'll hear, like, these just hoes on all these various shows and Twitter spaces, and they don't know anything about black American history, and it shows. There's things that they'll say about movies and popular culture and this, that, and the other, and it's like, okay, I don't think you understand. There was no such thing as a black dude with dreadlocks on TV until, like, Lenny Kravitz. Like, it was, like, yeah, like, or maybe the guys from In Living Color. Black people are notoriously conservative in their appearance, or it was sort of like considered like that this was the leather vest, leather pants part of their career, where they were a leather pants, leather vest Negro. And so when there's kind of this, I still got it, I'm so sexy, but the guy's like 30 something, he's a dad, and he insists on wearing no shirt with a leather vest and leather pants when he's doing his tour. There's some artists that they could do that. There's not many. There's just not many. And, like, that's one of those things that, like, people don't really, okay. Just had to throw that one out there. You'll find pictures like that, but overall, like, it was, you associate really black American style as something that's relatively conservative. Like, you don't expect to see Aerosmith. When you find groups like this, you will find it is quote-unquote rare music. You will find, like, this is like black merda, that you will find almost nobody knows this even exists. There's a lot about cool parts of rock culture, and you wouldn't believe what this band looks like that's just vanished. And so because of the loss of culture, you then have stuff being filled in, which is not just fake culture, is unbelievably fake to the point where it's obviously insane. When you've dealt with GenderSexuals as much as I have, you inevitably encounter the ones that it's obvious that they're kind of cracking, they're going crackers. This is sort of a group of people who they associate with, who allow them to live in a fantasy world. A lot of it is girls who were, a 6, that they're starting to get closer to the wall, and they start getting a little nuts, and so they start championing, F12. And gender sexuality is like, I guess, what's going to make them popular among some group of people at some point. I think a lot of it is then they could fool some young kind of activist-minded guy, to get in the bear trap. And so the other, like, with a lot of gender sexual kind of stuff, it's also, they desperately want people to pay attention to them. The narcissism is just so obvious. Now, a lot of these people who are all about it on the left, they can't see it because they're inherently kind of narcissists. there's a whole stack of usually character traits that go along with their unlikable ratio of ear to jaw, ear to the rest of their head, forehead to the rest of their face, symmetry of their face, how hard it is for them to get muscle mass and keep muscle mass. For both men and women, having muscle mass and keeping muscle mass it's a sign of neoteny. And so when that's not, when it goes to adiposity, or they just start to catabolize easily, that's a sign of the worse genes than good genes, which would be keeping the muscle on and therefore keep looking young, which is high sexual market value inherently because of the genetics. So this is going to be a hard part of this, because what it is that it will be a divorce, because there are going to be people who are like, I'm sorry, you fucking mutants, I'm taking my talent and getting the fuck away from you. So now Scott Adams made it clear in one regard who to stay the fuck away from, and now you're starting to get an understanding of the Blue Enclave and the other people you got to stay the fuck away from. And the Blue Enclaves are going to die. The West Coast is over. And this is now the key signs of it. You're now seeing it completely and totally. And yeah, just putting it out there.